This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
More than 20 Somali civilians were killed and nearly 35 others were wounded in clashes yesterday between armed fighters and Ethiopian forces in an area north of the capital, Mogadishu.
The renewed clashes forced a large number of civilians to flee from Mogadishu to temporary camps where they live in terrible conditions.
لا تزال المواجهات الدامية بين أطراف النزاع في الصومال توقع.
Bloody clashes between conflicting sides in Somalia have caused many victims and forced tens of thousands of civilians to flee their homes in search of a safe haven. More than 500,000 people, mainly women and children, traveled on this road, which links Mogadishu to the largest nearby city, Afgoye, which, according to the United Nations, is experiencing the worst humanitarian catastrophe in Africa. The Anfa camp is one of the many camps that have spread throughout the suburbs of Mogadishu, where thousands have taken refuge from the hell of random shelling by the Ethiopian forces who are responding to the attacks from armed Somali fighters. These camps do not have even the most basic services, and refugees live in extremely difficult humanitarian conditions. The refugees themselves are asking, is there anyone to help?
We're requesting international agencies to send us aid that we desperately need. We don't have a tent to protect us from the rain and cold. We escaped from the fighting, and our children are sick. We don't have any food or water to drink.
According to the United Nations, 1 to 1.5 million people are desperately in need of urgent humanitarian aid. Aid organizations say that the government's inability to guarantee security impedes its efforts to provide security outside the capital. At checkpoints on the road leading to refugee camps, armed fighters are demanding money in exchange for allowing the aid convoy to pass through. This has resulted in a call for urgent international intervention to ensure that aid gets to those afflicted.
An Algerian security source said that 4 people were killed and 23 others were wounded by the explosion of a booby-trapped car this morning in the village of Thania, east of the Algerian capital.
The explosion targeted a police station in the village, located nearly 50 kilometers from the capital.
لم يحن للجزائر بعد طي صفحة العنف الدامي على أراضيها.
Algerians have not yet had a chance to turn the page of their bloody history. An explosion targeted a police station in the Thania region, east of the Algerian capital, nearly a month after a similar one detonated in the city of Nasiriyah, also east of the capital. The Thania explosion, which comes as part of a wave of recent attacks in Algeria, may indicate the rise of what is being described as armed extremists who are regrouping and preparing to regain influential power. This attack brings back frightening memories of the bloody years during which more than 200,000 people were killed after the election's results were cancelled in 1992, when the Islamic Salvation Front was close to winning. Algerians looked forward to putting these memories behind them with tight security control and the Charter for Peace and National Reconciliation, which was aimed at eliminating the source of violence. However, it did not eliminate them completely. The past 12 months have revealed an escalation in attacks that targeted government institutions and security agency headquarters. They carry the thumbprint of Al-Qaeda after the Salafist group for Call and Combat announced that it had joined it. More than 100 people were killed in suicide bombing attacks that had different targets, beginning with the headquarters of the Algerian government and a police station in the center of the capital last April, as well as army units in the Akhbariya and the Dilias port. The attacks also did not spare a crowd of people waiting for the motorcade of President Abdulaziz Bouteflika in the city of Betna last September. However, the twin suicide attacks last December, which targeted a United Nations office and the government headquarters in Algiers, killing nearly 40 people, were the most dangerous of these attacks, not just for the number of people who were killed, but also because it was the first attack that returned the issue of violence in Algeria to the international level. The United Nations decided to form an independent committee to investigate the situation. However, Algeria quickly opposed this.
نبدأ هذه النشرة من فلسطين. أكدت مصادر حكومية إسرائيلية
Israeli officials confirmed today that Israel does not intend to prevent the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, from establishing control over the Rafah border crossing if he reaches an agreement with Cairo on this issue. Abbas's request that his forces take charge of Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt has received support from the US, the European Union, and Arab countries. However, it is not yet clear how Abbas's forces will be able to control Rafah crossing, especially when considering that Hamas's forces are in control of Gaza.
في غزة أكد مصدر في حكومة إسماعيل هنية المقالة أن القيادي البارز في حركة حماس.
A spokesman from the ousted government of Ismail Haniyeh said that the prominent Hamas leader Mahmoud al-Zahar will preside over the delegation that will go to Cairo. The delegation will talk with the Egyptians about opening a dialogue with Fatah and the Rafah crossing. Hamas's spokesman added that al-Zahar's visit to Egypt comes after he was invited by Egyptian officials. Meanwhile, the Egyptian security forces are trying to control the entrance points between the Egyptian city of Rafah and Cairo.
من مدينة رفح المصرية باتجاه القاهرة والمدن الأخرى.
If you are a Palestinian, then you are not allowed to pass this crossing point. But if you are Egyptian, then you can freely go to Arish or Cairo. This is the latest checkpoint erected by the Egyptian security forces, which have been advancing gradually to the Rafah crossing. At this checkpoint, cars are inspected, IDs are verified, and in most cases, Palestinians are forced to go back where they had come from without being able to buy what they came here for.
All the gas stations are empty. They say that the Egyptian government is preventing gas stations in Gaza from receiving oil from Egypt.
We urge our brothers in Egypt to help us end the siege against the Palestinian people, even in a small way.
Gaza does not have enough gas, food, and medicine because Egyptian authorities are not allowing the Palestinians to acquire these things from Egypt once again. Some traders are using this situation to increase prices.
They tell us that we can get what we need, but in reality there is nothing.
There is an acute shortage in primary products which have negatively affected the people living in Rafah due to the rise of prices. This has compelled them to urge the Egyptian authority to find a solution for this situation.
The pharmacies do not have medicine. We do not have medicine. This is because our Palestinian brothers bought everything. Now we are suffering like them.
They were imprisoned behind the wall in Gaza. Now all of us are imprisoned since they came here. All the products that were here went to Gaza and we don't have any products left. Right now, we are under siege.
1.5 million came here and bought everything. This increased demand on the product, causing commercial traders to raise the prices.
Everyone here plans to stay and has hope. The Palestinians want to pass, but the Egyptian security forces are preventing them from doing so. The commercial traders also want to stay here so they can make more money. People's miseries are others' gains.
For the first time since the opening of the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt last Wednesday, there was a reduction in the flow of Palestinians going to the Egyptian cities of Rafah and Al Arish. This comes after the Egyptian security forces implemented a plan that led to a major reduction in the number of people crossing the border. The Egyptian security forces also set up many checkpoints on the main, side and mountain streets to prevent Palestinians from reaching Al Arish. In addition, it put out strict security information regarding the need to close all the businesses in central Al Arish, emptying the city of Palestinians.
تراجعت أعداد الفلسطينيين المتدفقين إلى الأراضي المصرية عبر الحدود.
The number of Palestinians going to Egypt through the open borders has been notably reduced due to the stormy, rainy weather, the shortage of goods and industry in Egypt, as well as the large increase in prices in comparison to just days earlier. Exceptionally, there are no scenes of gaps along the borders or any notable crowds after the Egyptian security forces began taking measures to end the flow of Palestinians through the borders.
This is the first time I come to Gaza. We thank Mubarak, who did this so that we may go to Gaza and so that the Palestinians can come to Egypt. We request more from the president, God willing. We say to him, may this always remain so that the Palestinian people can come to us and we can go there.
If the border is closed, Palestinians fear that the situation will return to the suffering of before, especially since the opening of the border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip is temporary and came as a result of the public explosion of the besieged Palestinians. They believe that the opening of the border does not mean that the siege is ended and that if the border is closed, the situation will return as it was before. There are more essential issues that cannot be resolved until all the borders are opened.
We're happy that Hosni Mubarak opened the roads and let us enter with our cars and purchase goods. We hope that Mubarak will keep it open always. This way, the Egyptian people are standing with their brotherly Palestinians.
We hope that the borders remain open in an organized manner, not in an unorganized way. Organization is good for us and the Egyptians. I hope that Egypt sends us fuel, steel, and all the necessities for Gaza.
In response, the ousted Palestinian government announced that it rejects returning to the international border agreement with the Israeli occupation in order to operate the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. It demanded that the crossing be considered a Palestinian-Egyptian border, stressing that the demands of the Palestinian people must be that the Rafah border crossing remain Arab Palestinian Egyptian. It rejected returning to the international border monitoring agreement with Israel to operate the crossing.
After the Israeli occupation left the Gaza Strip, it is clear that the international border monitoring agreement was forced upon us. It enabled the control and hegemony over the movement of citizens in the Gaza Strip. It hindered this movement and prevented goods coming from Egypt. We say that a new agreement must allow citizens to enter and exit, far from occupation. It should also allow the movement of goods to and from brotherly Egypt.
The opening of the borders between the Gaza Strip and Egypt last week with the flow of tens of thousands of Palestinians was not limited to containing the siege crisis, but telling rare humanitarian stories. For Al-Madar, Walid Abdul Rahman from inside the Rafah border crossing, the southern Gaza Strip.
There are just 25 hours left before the Winograd Commission publishes its final report on the Second Lebanon War, and the pressure is building on Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to resign. I'm now joined by IBA's diplomatic correspondent Leah Zinder. Leah?
Yes, Laura. Prime Minister Olmert was making a determined effort to show business as usual today as he visited the IDF troops on the border of Gaza. But he knows that his political future hangs in the balance tomorrow at 5 o'clock when the Winograd Commission will come to the Prime Minister's office, as they did with the interim report, and present to him their report. From the Prime Minister's office, they will make their way through the snow, presumably, to Binyanei HaUmah, the Jerusalem Convention Center, where they will have a press conference. And there, for the first time, we will know what is contained in the Winograd report, which numbers 500 pages and took 16 months to compose. Now, the opposition has already asked for a special plenary session in the Knesset on Thursday, hoping to capitalize on the momentum of the Winograd report. However, Knesset Speaker Dalia Itzig, who is, of course, from the Prime Minister's own Kadima party, said no, there will be a special session, but only next week. Laura?
Leah, are there any signs that the Prime Minister is thinking about stepping down?
None at all. In fact, as we've heard, he's been extremely defiant. And today, Tsahi Hanegbi, Knesset member who is very close to the Prime Minister, came out publicly and said anybody, for instance, the Labour Party, who's thinking of early elections as a way out of the crisis can forget about it. He said Olmert is determined to remain in office until November 2010, when the next elections are scheduled. Now, today, Prime Minister Olmert received a very important boost from Shas spiritual leader Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who called him personally, wished him luck for the Winograd report, and even paraphrased the words of Jeremiah, saying, "Fear not, for I am with you." That may have something to do with the fact that the Prime Minister, in response to a Shas request, has now said that the issue of Jerusalem will be left until last in negotiations with the Palestinians.
Returning now to the long-anticipated final Winograd report on the Second Lebanon War, we're joined by Dr. Ari Carmon, president of the Israel Democracy Institute. Dr. Carmon, thanks so much for coming in this evening.
Thank you for having me.
The whole country, of course, is holding its breath, waiting for the final Winograd report. The truth is, we all know what happened during the Second Lebanon War. Have we become, as a society, overly dependent on commissions of inquiry?
Overly dependent, to me, is an understatement. Unfortunately, investigation commissions have become in Israel a fetish that, to a large extent, relieve most of the public from some political responsibilities. Let me elaborate. By means of comparison, no other democracy on the European continent ever establishes commission reports, and in the Anglo-Saxon countries, in most of the Anglo-Saxon countries where they do have investigation commissions, they limit their jurisdiction to structural conclusions, no personal conclusions.
But Dr. Carmon, isn't it a sign that we're a democratic, responsible society, that we're forming these committees of inquiry and we're asking people to account for what they did?
No, I don't think so. There are other ways of accountability. First and foremost, in a democracy, judging the role of any elected entity, and this means accountability, is in the ballots. There are other means of judging those whom we elect. Unfortunately, many of us tend to go on the demonization track. We demonize those whom we tend to elect. We throw at them all the evil that has accumulated. No, I totally oppose this track, and I think that when we look backward, and most of the commissions that we are familiar with, from the Agranat through Or, we see that most of the conclusions that have to do with structural changes with an eye toward the future have not been implemented. So I suspect that seeking any kind of personal responsibility, and definition of responsibility is very flexible, is something that we really have to do some serious soul-searching into.
Dr. Carmon, whatever the Winograd report says tomorrow, election fever, of course, is in the air. Is this a good thing for the country?
As far as I'm concerned, as far as I can see that, stability is one of the most important traits of any democracy. Let me share with you a paradox. We have heard in the last several years a proposal to change the system into a presidential system. Let me say up front, we oppose the presidential system, but some of those who want an early election were those who called for a presidential election in which you are stuck with the president through the entire term. No, I think that the early election will not be good for the country.
In Washington, President Bush's lies and fabrications and their disastrous consequences in the region have become one of the most leading studies conducted by two U.S. independent investigative journalist organizations.
A study by two U.S. nonprofit journalism organizations found that President Bush and top administration officials issued hundreds of false statements about the national security threat from Iraq in the 2 years preceding the war in Iraq.
The original source was U.S. Vice President Richard Cheney, who told a congressional committee there was evidence indicating that Iraq was developing weapons of mass destruction.
About weapons of mass destruction, evidence, and other things.
المؤسستان وهما مركز النزاهة العامة وصندوق استقلال الصحافة.
The two organizations which conducted the study are the Center for Public Integrity and the Fund for Independence in Journalism. The study counted 935 false statements in the 2-year period. It found that in speeches, briefings, interviews, and other venues, Bush and administration officials stated unequivocally on at least 532 occasions that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction or had links to Al-Qaeda or both.
There weren't any terrorist attacks in Iraq before the war.
The study concluded that the statements were part of an orchestrated campaign that effectively galvanized public opinion and in the process led the nation to war under decidedly false pretenses.
Who are they trying to fool? We knew all along that this administration has no integrity, not only because of its total failure, but also because it's still trying to undermine the public's intelligence.
Named in the study along with Bush were top officials of the administration during the period studied: Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State Colin Powell, and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. However, most of the false statements were made by Bush, who issued more than 230 falsehoods about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and 28 about Iraq's links to Al-Qaeda. Colin Powell came in second place in terms of the number of false statements issued on Iraq. In addition, the study criticized the U.S. media, which it says was dragged into massive differential coverage that was based on official lies. There's nothing new in the findings of this independent study. However, the number of lies and false statements issued by Bush and his top officials may renew demands of bringing the president and his vice president on charges during Bush's last year in the White House or after he's out of office. Atef Abed Jawad, the Syrian Arab Television, Washington.
عاطف عبد الجواد التلفزيون العربي السوري واشنطن.
Once again, the U.S. and Iran are exchanging threats. Yesterday, Iran's Foreign Minister Menasher Motaki warned against imposing new sanctions on his country before hearing what the International Atomic Energy Agency had to say about Iran's cooperation with the UN inspectors. Motaki said that his country's cooperation can be corroborated by the positive reports given by the IAEA and by the continuous Russian support. This news comes as Iran received the last shipment of nuclear fuel necessary to run the Bushehr nuclear plant. Ahmed al-Bahraini reports from Tehran.
Russia has finally fulfilled its promise of supplying nuclear fuel to Iran. Today, the last shipment of nuclear fuel arrived in Tehran after nearly 2 years of delay. The fuel will be used to run the Bushehr nuclear reactor to generate electric energy. Tehran received 82 tons in 8 shipments of nuclear fuel. This latest Russian move will likely help bridge the political gap between the two allied countries, especially after the Russia-Iranian relation witnessed a decline on the political arena. Meanwhile, Iranian officials welcomed the latest Russian move and described it as a fatal blow against those trying to isolate Iran diplomatically.
Bushehr nuclear reactor is about to start operations. We will continue to produce energy in large quantities. Our activities are civilian, which was confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency on numerous occasions. I am dismayed by those seeking to impose sanctions on Iran without a legal justification.
2 weeks ago, Russia started to send fuel shipments to the Islamic Republic. The Russian move coincided with Bush's visit to the region. Russia is again cooperating with Iran and trying to help it maintain its civilian nuclear program. Amidst this, the U.S., along with the permanent members of the Security Council, as well as Germany, are seeking to impose additional sanctions on Iran. Meanwhile, the Iranians described the Russian move as a diplomatic achievement on 2 levels. It helped Iran receive its long-awaited fuel shipments while widening the gap between UN Security Council's leading powers.
When a person is caught in a weak position, as the case with Iran's enemies, he tries to steer chaos in order to impose his will. We will continue to persevere and we will not back down.
No matter how the Iranians feel about their country's nuclear achievements, many remain on the lookout for those they describe as the enemies of Iran, who continue to mobilize efforts aimed at directing a painful strike against Iran, not necessarily at the military level.
Well, now Iran has urged the permanent members of the UN Security Council to correct their past mistakes and end their involvement in Iran's nuclear program. Foreign Minister Motaki said the Council should wait for the International Atomic Energy Agency to complete its work with Iran before issuing resolutions. Motaki said that Iran has never wanted nuclear weapons. On US-Iran relations, Motaki said he didn't foresee any improvements, adding that it wasn't important who was in the White House, but what policies the US pursues.
Russia has delivered the 7th shipment of nuclear fuel to Iran for the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Moscow is still required to send one more shipment based on a timetable the two sides have agreed to. Bushehr power plant will generate 1,000 megawatts of electricity once it gets the 85 tons of fuel it needs to start operating. The construction of the plant started before 1979 with Western help, but was later handed over to Russia after Iran's Islamic Revolution.
In Pakistan, at least 12 people have been killed in a missile attack in a village in North Waziristan. Local officials say the missile hit a mountain hideout near the Afghan border. And the dead are all suspected of having links to the Taliban. Across the border, more than 500 Afghan women have staged a mass protest on Tuesday against the kidnapping of an American aid worker. The women called on officials to find Sid Mizel and her Afghan driver Abdul Hadi. Gunmen abducted the two on Saturday in a residential neighborhood in the southern city of Kandahar. The demonstration was a rare display of women gathering together publicly. No one has yet claimed responsibility for that kidnapping. Egypt has boosted security around the border town of Rafah on Tuesday as it steps up its efforts to seal off the border with Gaza. Troops are rebuilding the border fence and rounding up Palestinians who have strayed further into Egyptian territory. Palestinians, of course, tore the fence down almost a week ago in a desperate attempt to restock on the things like much-needed fuel, medicine and other basic necessities. Tens of thousands have made use of the crossing since then, but that number has reduced significantly over the past 24 hours. Egyptian officials are now due to meet with both Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas representatives separately on Wednesday to try to find a solution. Well, a breach in the barrier has allowed families who have been separated for years to finally visit each other freely. Sheikh Abdul Sattah Alban lives in Egyptian Rafah. He sees himself as sort of a point of contact for Palestinians there. He's calling on all sides to work together to keep it open for the sake of Gazans. This is his story.
I am Sheikh Abdul Sattah Al-Ghalban, the honorary consul of Palestinians abroad. That's how Palestinians call me, because they love me as I take care of them, regardless of whether they belong to Hamas or Fatah. We are one united nation. Our family is divided between Palestinian and Egyptian parts of Rafah. When this border fence was built, they thought it would separate families and friends apart. It was sad. We prayed to God this fence would fall. I plead to the Palestinian Authority and Mr. Ismail Haniyeh to consider the 23rd of January as a national day. It is the day the fence was brought down. Palestinians broke free of their shackles and opened the borders to rejoin our sister Egypt. The crossing points must be merely Egyptian and Palestinian. No one else should take control of them. Americans and Israelis tried to make Palestinians kneel and surrender by closing the borders and the crossing points, but the Palestinians resisted. Now the aid coming into Gaza from Egypt is endless. Convoys extend from South Egypt to Rafah. We are proud of that, as Gazans are part of Egypt. Egypt is our mother. Gaza returned home. Egyptians and Palestinians are one people. Gazans love and respect Egypt's history and struggle for freedom.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.